Just
move that.
somebody's dog barking. There was a toilet flusher for a while.
Morning, Mike. How you doing? Getting there. About Thomas. Hanson here. Hey, thank you for.
He was arrested again Saturday. Yeah,
That's the best thing. I mean,
but he was out Sunday morning.
Oh.
That's a good thing.
We're only gonna move one of them. Then the other one, yes.
Good, I'm just.
Fine, and yourself?
Morning.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll be Mo. Everything calm up north?
There's always stuff.
You know that over there.
There's always stuff going on.
I think I've got her contact information.
Yeah.
Before. Yeah, all right.
Did you do something with your water supply?
It's in the wall.
Great, thanks.
They've always had trouble up.
Okay, it's, good morning, everyone. It's 8:30, and I will call the meeting of the Kane County CARES Act Allocation Committee to order. Ask the clerk to call the roll.
Hanson.
Here.
Kenyon. Braz.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thomas. Sturgis.
Yes.
Okay, you have a quorum.
Thank you. As it relates to the first item of business, the approval of the minutes, we'll defer that to our next meeting. The committee's meeting weekly, so the minute turnaround time isn't as quick as our monthly meeting, so we'll have those for our next meeting. Next item is public comment. Welcome anyone in the audience to make a presentation. Mr. Cross, good morning. Okay,
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Well, good morning. My name is Tom Cross, and I work at Aurora University along with Meg Howes. And I'm sitting here looking at you guys. I remember the good old days when I was in public service where we only had to worry about governors getting indicted and go to jail. And now you guys get to worry about pandemics and figuring out how the world survives. So thank you for what you do. I know you're in a difficult period, and anybody in public service right now is struggling with a lot of issues. And again, just thank you, because not enough people say thanks for public service. I still think it's an admirable place to be. We know you're struggling with how to spend money you receive from the federal government, and we appreciate the position you're in. I know you've had some conversations about where that money goes, whether it goes to municipalities, whether it stays in the county. And our request today is for you to at least consider the not-for-profit world. And again, with the respect that you have a very, very difficult task. But I just want to give you a perspective of a place like Aurora University. And we have some fine institutions of higher education in this county on the south end and on the north end. I served as chairman of the Board of Higher Ed after I left the General Assembly. And I realized then, when I looked around and traveled around the state, how lucky we are here in the Kane County area, in the Fox Valley area, that we have very good institutions of higher learning. And we sometimes take that for granted, or we really don't know what they do or don't do. But Aurora University has an impact beyond the city of Aurora and beyond the little bubble of what you would say is Aurora University. We have about 6,000 students. 3,400 to 3,500 of them are undergrads. The balance are in graduate school or do remote learning, or what you would call online learning. We have one of the lowest tuitions in the state of Illinois. We have about 30% of our 1,200 employees live in Kane County. About 30% of our students live in or come from Kane County. A good number of our students who end up, whether they are in nursing, social work, business, teaching, end up in Kane County. And we have about 50% of our students as first-generation students. Imagine that you're able to come to a university for the first time from your family, and about 90% of them graduate, which is a pretty impressive number. About 35% of the students at AU are Latino. And also the numbers of graduates from that space are also very, very impressive in that higher number. So we're impressed with that, and we're pleased with that. We have a STEM school that is not a gifted program for 3rd through 8th graders that services kids and students, not kids, students from Batavia and the Aurora area. We actually have 6 schools that are eligible for that, but it's one of the most impressive schools you'll see, I would argue, in the country The test scores are very, very impressive relative to the rest of the state. And again, students from around not only Aurora area, but up into King County. We will be starting a program in the fall of 2021 where if you're a student with autism, you will have an opportunity to come to AU and get a 4-year degree. There are about 70 institutions around the country. And with this program starting in place, we will be number 71. There aren't a lot of opportunities with students around the Chicago area, the King County area, the Fox Valley area that have autism that can actually come to school and get a 4-year degree. And that program is up and ready to go in the fall of 2021. You can get an MBA, you can get an MPA. We have a speaker series that is open to everybody in the Fox Valley area in King County that's free. We've had Supreme Court justices, we've had attorney generals, we've had Doris Kearns Goodwin, we've had David McCullough, we've had General Petraeus. We feel like as an institution that we're more, again, than just for about our students, but for the whole community and for the Fox Valley area. And we serve a greater area than just Aurora University. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor for AU. The other thing that I want to stress, a lot of people have seen a lot of money flowing from the federal government and the state government. We, and at one point, the CARES Act, we sent you a letter. The CARES Act gave us a little money, but that money, I'm going to read it specifically, that money was only federally authorized for distribution to low-income students. We have a lot of low-income students at Aurora, a lot of kids that apply for MAP money. It's the Monetary Assistance Program that the state gives money to students that are low-income. And incidentally, those students also do exceptionally well at AU. We have a lot of those students. So that money was for distribution to low-income students, refunds to students for housing, and other limited areas. We have right now $919,000 that we have spent or in the process of spending that are COVID-related expenses. $900,000. We're going to spend money on quarantine and isolation housing. We have a contract. We've obligated ourselves to the amount of $167,000. Testing is and will cost us $250,000. PPE for students and employees, $295,000. And a lot of our students didn't have the technology and the capacity financially to have computers to do work from home. And we spent money to buy students laptops to the amount of $207,000. So $900,000 that we don't have budgeted. And anything you can do would be greatly appreciated by the university, because we didn't budget for this, like a lot of places did. But it would also help students that desperately need money. So again, I know the ask is high. I know you got everybody asking for money, but we'd ask you to at least take a look at not-for-profits and take a look at places like AU. I know one of the arguments is we're going to give money to cities, but I think about the city of Aurora, whose needs are extremely high and don't have the ability to take money. But I guess they have the way to do it, but their needs are also extremely excessive. So with that, Meg and I would be glad to answer any questions. Anything I missed you want to add? So we appreciate the opportunity for you to listen to us. We appreciated that. And if you have any questions, we'd be glad to try to answer. But thank you.
Any questions of the committee? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Cross. I appreciate your correspondence and being here this morning. And obviously, that's something we'll take into account as we move through the process.
We appreciate again what you guys and gals do. Thank you very, very much. Good luck.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address the committee? Mr. Shepard.
My name is Ken Shepro. I've been here before. I have a handout, Mr. Chairman, that I did not make enough for everybody, but I did make enough for the committee and for the state's attorney as well. Is that better? Thank you for your attention that you've been nice enough to give me in my prior comments. Today, I just want to focus on the application process that was discussed at the last meeting. I know that there were comments about how the fire districts might be able to apply. And the handout that I've handed out, that's why it's a handout, is an effort to focus on what I think is a problem if the fire districts and the municipalities are required to file applications together. A couple of examples. The map there is from the Campton Hills Village website. Campton Hills doesn't have a large staff, but they do have pieces of 5 fire districts within their community. And similarly, the Elburn Fire District is in the village of Elburn, the village of Lily Lake, village of Campton Hills, village of Virgil, and unincorporated Kane County. My point is simply that knowing how limited the staffs are in both most of the fire districts and in the smaller municipalities, they would actually have a more difficult time, I think, putting applications together than the large cities. City of Aurora would really have to file 1 application, but Campton Hills would have to hear from 5 fire districts and then decide, because those fire districts are obviously in other communities as well as the unincorporated area, and try to figure out which part of the fire district should be coordinated from that municipality. I think that's just a recipe for delay and confusion, and frankly, too many applications or too many people trying to get involved in applications. Now, one suggestion that was made that I think would be worth pursuing is that if a fire district wants to make application with the municipality that is connected with, and that would come to mind for both the Geneva and the Batavia unincorporated areas, which are serviced by the municipal fire departments, certainly that would be acceptable because that would save on applications. But in most cases, including the larger fire districts that have so many municipalities that they serve, as well as the unincorporated area. And my other numbers are really just designed to show that out of the 37% of the population of Kane County that is served by fire districts and not by the city fire departments, only 11% of those are in the unincorporated area. The rest of the population of those fire districts live in incorporated villages. So I would urge the committee when the application process is finalized that you give consideration to having the fire districts have the option to file their applications separately and not to go through the municipalities. Happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for listening.
Mr. Frost?
Mr. Shepherd, I'm just wondering, I'm looking through here and I don't see it, but what is the total number of districts? Just, I see a lot of population.
There are approximately, and I say approximately, there are 22 fire districts, not counting Hoffman Estates, Barrington Hills, and Bartlett, which have, minuscule population.
Okay.
Geneva Township is not a fire district as such, but it operates as a fire district. It has both an ambulance district and a fire district, and contracts with the city of Geneva. West Dundee Fire District voted to dissolve in March primary and amalgamated with Rutland Dundee. So that leaves 22 fire districts, of which I believe 5 are what we call paper districts. That is to say, they have no operating department. They contract with one of the municipal fire departments. I think there's one in Carpentersville that contracts with Carpentersville City. There's 2 in Aurora that contract with the city of Aurora. And then there's Geneva and Batavia that contract with Geneva and Batavia, respectively.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Shepherd. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the audience this morning that would like to address the committee? Anyone online? All right, hearing none, we'll go on to our discussion items. First item was staff requirements for administration. Mr. McMahon,
Good morning. So there is a resolution that's in front of you in the lower section of your agenda. I think it's 5A. This is a significant undertaking. We have already started to work extensively with the Office of Community Reinvestment. My staff really spent a considerable amount of time in the last 2 weeks since we were tasked and requested to assist this committee and the board with the creation and the development of these programs. I've had in the last week a number of conversations both internally and externally. I've talked with some external consultant groups. I expect to get at least one proposal, if not today, early this week, probably a second one this week as well. I've interviewed staff to bring on. I'll initially bring that person on to my budget, but that person will be dedicated exclusively to managing the application, reviewing documentation, working with the consultant, working with the Office of Community Reinvestment. So there will be a significant amount of staff time involved in getting this program up and running, not only initially, but then as we move into the later half of the summer, once we start receiving applications and documentation, et cetera, so we can prepare the appropriate reports and then comply with various audit requirements. The resolution that's in front of you this morning essentially is my request where you direct the Office of Community Reinvestment to work with my office, staff from that office to work with me and my office to get this program up and running. Obviously, there's a sense of urgency to all of this, so I'd ask for that consideration this morning.
all right, one of the things we talked about before, there is a companion resolution that talks about creating a budget for the assistance on the external, or on the
It's both internal
process and external. Do you want to
Yes,
address that
it
too,
is.
Joe?
So Scott Berger and I have worked on this over the weekend. I have a draft budget. I'm really not ready to present that to you this morning. I'm glad to pass that out. I would like you to just kind of hold that for a week. There is an urgency. We need to get a budget in place so Scott and his team can account for their time. Anyone else who is brought on to work on this program can account for their time and then allocate that time to fund, I think it's 353, which is the fund that Mr. Onzik has set up in the county system that is essentially holding the CARES Act dollars, the $92.9 million.
All right, and the background on these two items is that we, as a committee, directed it with the consent or cooperation of the state's attorney that his office oversee the process for us. That's in part due to availability, but also in important part the legal aspects of what we're going through. I mean, the goal is to get this project from start to finish. When we finish, you know, while we're going through the process, we want to comply with all the regulations. And when we finish, we want to have an audit-worthy set of documents in place that if the federal government or the state were to inquire as to how we dealt with things, we do it in a way that they expect to see the material. We had discussed initially Scott Berger's office being a party that would be significantly involved in this. Scott's office is obviously tasked with doing other things, but he's able to consult with the state's attorney's office to help us. And that's important because the federal grant packages that the audits that we may have to go through are something that Scott has a great deal of familiarity with. So he can help provide some structure. And to the extent that his staff is going to put time in on that, that would be available for reimbursement through the program. And as would be the outside consultant that we would hire in collaboration with the Office of Community Reinvestment. So this is the starting framework for that. The authorization to direct Scott to help, you know, creates the initial step then to ask for budget reimbursement after we get Scott or his staff's time into the process. And then the ultimate discussion about hiring an outside party to help. That's really a critical aspect of this. That's underway. There's discussions with that, and the state's attorney will present more detailed information regarding that, hopefully at our next meeting.
Right, so I hope to have at least one, maybe two proposals for you to consider next week, and then get them in place right away.
All right. The process for vetting that, Mr. McMahon, do you want to comment on that?
So I've spoken with my colleagues in Lake County, DuPage County, and Will County, one of the groups. That's the group that I expect to have a proposal. Maybe I'll have it today, I'm not sure. The CEO of that group and I spoke late Friday evening by telephone. They were going to work on it over the weekend. That group is already working with all of our surrounding counties and the administration of their program. They also work with the state of Indiana. So highly skilled, really experts in this area to help us get a program up and running. And just to kind of give you kind of two different models, it looks to me like Lake County has retained a consultant to help them create a group. That's kind of phase one of their program, and then run the program, which would be phase two. It looks like Will County has an alternative model where they have just almost outsourced the entire administration of the program to this outside consultant. That contract is obviously much more expensive. They've got a lot more involvement. It sounds like that outside group meets with your counterpart in Will County, if not on a weekly basis, every other week basis. So there's a lot of work, but I hope to have that for you to consider next week.
All right. And obviously, not only the experience and credentials of whoever we would consider is important, but they have to have the time to allocate to us essentially immediately. And if they've got multiple other engagements, we want to make sure they have the staff to dedicate for us.
Sure.
Right. All right. Any comments or questions of the state's attorney? Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been in favor of this idea from kind of early on in the process, so it's good to see it coming about. I think we're going to need the help, especially if we decide to administer small business grants and nonprofit grants ourselves. We're definitely going to need that kind of help. So I'm definitely in favor. I would be curious to know if anybody present has any objections to this.
Any comments from the committee? Obviously, we're not making a final decision today. Today, we'll have a resolution that asks for cooperation between Scott Berger's office and the state's attorney's office. But as far as an outside engagement, that's something we'll consider at our next meeting. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for State's Attorney McMahon. I know you're not ready to present numbers to us, but since you've spoken with Lake and Will counties, what is the range we're looking at with respect to higher costs for consultant?
So the consultant in Will County is just an estimate on my part, in excess of $500,000 for the entire outsourcing of the program. In Lake County, it looks like it's a phased program. I think kind of phase one is somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 for the administration of phase one.
Thank you.
I think, obviously you have to pay for whatever is reasonable, but just by standards of percentages taken for administrative fees out of grants, sometimes it's 10% or 5%. That seems to me to be in a range that would be reasonable under the circumstances. Obviously, we're not making a decision today.
Right.
That'll become fine-tuned as we move forward. All right, any other questions from any of the committee members or any of the board members that are here or online? Hearing none, do we have a consensus to move forward as the state's attorney has suggested, subject to getting information back? Yes, Mr. Hanson.
I have one question. I realize there's no proposal today. This group today was built to move things forward quickly, as well as being thorough in our homework and our research, and your department's doing the same thing. Should we move forward and find an outside resource to be our consultant and administrator for this? What are they going to be designed to move and onboard quickly and get things moving forward quickly? You talked about one of the possible administrators already being involved with several other counties. Will we be a priority of theirs, and will they be ready to go right away?
They will be ready to go. The group that I mentioned is working with Lake and DuPage and Will and works with the state of Indiana, a fairly large group, but one that I'm confident. And I haven't seen the proposal. We'll have to look at the specifics of their scope of work and their proposal. But certainly Kane County being a priority and their timeline being consistent with our timeline of being urgent and accurate is a significant factor in who is ultimately selected. And so, yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McMahon.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is the status of funds and funds available for current distribution. Mr. Rickard has presented us a report this morning. Mr. Rickard, care to comment?
Yeah, very quickly. This is the status of the funds at this period. They're located at First American Bank. Our current balance is now $92,970,000, $186.10. We've earned $69,468.20 in interest to date.
Okay. I appreciate your giving us this report. Obviously, that'll be updated periodically as we make disbursements and accrue additional income over time. And I appreciate your maximizing the interest, knowing that the funds have to be there only short term because the expectation is we'll do that. So that's a tough balancing act. But $60,000+ is not insignificant in this process. So, all right, any questions regarding the treasurer's report?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to skip down to item. I'm sorry, the timing, next item was timing of distribution procedures, but item E is really the appropriate next thing to talk about, which is the application in the process and time frame. And once we do that, then we can move through the other items. That was my mistake in setting up the agenda. But with respect to the application process, we were provided at our last meeting draft applications and intergovernmental agreements. Over the week, a number of individuals have made comments to the state's attorney's office, which the state's attorney is in the process of reviewing and compiling into a new or an updated application. Mr. McMahon, do you want to comment on that?
No, I'm here to answer questions. We did receive a lot of comments at the end of last week and over the weekend, and they have been incorporated. That's a document that we continue to work on. But I'm here to answer questions. That's why I stepped up.
Additional input is being requested from the outside, from the other counties. I know the original draft included the other counties' information. The hope is to have a final compiled, updated draft for approval at our next meeting. Is that consistent with your understanding, Mr. McMahon?
It is. And I had a meeting with representatives from the, I forget the name of the group, Council of Mayors, the Metro West Council of Mayors. I believe Mayor Burns is here and Ms. Melendi are here this morning. They expressed concerns to me over a particular section of the application that would limit reimbursement for payroll expenses. And so we're working through that.
All right.
But a good productive meeting. They expressed their concerns, and I'll include their comments and concerns in the feedback to this board as we get a final document to you.
All right. And again, that it's somewhat like reading a dictionary. So the sooner we can get that in advance of our next meeting, the better. So the hope would be to have that part of it done next time we get together so we can move forward and then set a time frame for receiving them. Mr. Surgis.
Is that, can we get that via email as soon as it's available? I was thinking,
yes.
If this is a page, not a packet, but if it's a packet, if we can just get that kind of here.
Sure. And it is a packet. I've got a rough draft copy this morning, but we'll send that out by email when I get back to the office.
All right. And that actually would cover item H as well, which is the IGA indemnity agreements, because those are part and parcel of the application process, correct?
Yes.
All right. Ms. Wonicky.
Thank you, Chairman Hoshai. Just quickly, it'll go out to all board members, not
Send it
just.
to everybody, yes.
Good, perfect, thank you.
And of course, if anyone on the board has any comments or concerns, the sooner we know about them, the better, so we can address them in advance.
And we did get a number of comments from board members over the weekend. So this, an earlier draft was sent out to the entire board, I think about a week ago. I asked for comments by Friday at noon. It was kind of extended informally, I guess, through the weekend. And we received additional comments on Saturday. I think we got some more comments Sunday. We've incorporated those into the document that I have this morning. I haven't completely gone through it, and I have not had a chance to get it out to the board, but I will get the latest version out this morning when I get back to the office, and understand that it's still in a draft form.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Will that draft be redlined so that those of us who have gone over the original package don't have to try to, in our minds, remember what the adjustments that we would suggest? Would those be redlined?
Yes, yes. And the copy that I have is redlined here this morning. It will be redlined.
All right, yes. When reading the dictionary, it's easier to reread when it is redlined. Thank you. All right, so we'll have that for our next meeting. Item C was the timing of distribution and procedures for distribution. That process will flow. We talked last week about an application process that would be open for 14 days, having a deadline for applications, and then as soon as thereafter the applications were evaluated and vetted, we had authorized distribution of up to 80% of the funds. So I think there's no action to take on that item. Item D talks about really two issues: notice and then permissible applicants. The notice, once we have our final application, we will direct the state's attorney's office to send out requests for application to the parties that we perceive to fit within that category, which included not only the municipalities that local governmental entities that have been at our meetings, but also the other entities that we had talked about as permissible recipients. And so they'll be given notice of that, and then we'll have that short time frame as well. I think through the outreach we've had to date, some of those entities are already working on accumulating or tabulating the funds that they would deem appropriate for reimbursement. But I do want to talk about Mr. Shepro's comment here and concern and question. And I did have discussion since our last meeting with a number of people. My plan was initially, or personal feeling was initially, that we should include the fire districts within the municipalities application, and then have the unincorporated areas deal with the unincorporated, Mr. Martin's committee with the unincorporated fire districts request. But it was impressed upon me the concern when it comes to after the fact audit worthiness of the request, that it may be, to the extent we can do so, in our best interest to limit what we'll refer to as subrecipients. Okay, so if we give money to a municipality and they have someone that they then distribute it to, which is another outside entity, they're deemed in this process to be called a subrecipient. And I've been informed that we're in a better position if those entities were direct recipients from the county as opposed to a subrecipient, because of flow of information and indemnity contracting and that type of thing. So to the extent that, what we've seen here from Mr. Shepro this morning, but after thinking this through, I wanted to pose to the committee what the committee's pleasure would be regarding going forward in that respect. Mr. Frost?
Yeah, I kind of came to the same conclusion. I originally advocated for the municipalities distributing to the various fire districts that covered them, and then we would cover the unincorporated area. However, again, Mr. Shepro's comments and others I've heard, I'm thinking we should set aside a small block of money specifically for the fire district distribution. I'd like to hear the committee's thoughts on that, but there's 22 fire districts, as Mr. Shepro stated. I was told that South Elgin was going to be asking for about 80,000. So if the other districts are roughly in line, I think a lot of them will be less than that because some of them are very, very small. But even if you average $60,000 ask from each of the 22, that'd be 1.32 million. So I think we should distribute that money directly to the fire districts.
Mr. McMahon, I probably should have a permanent place at the microphone. I apologize.
Good exercise. On the
Is it, from your perspective, better for us to go directly with the districts than through the cities,
Well, I think
fire districts?
the goal is there's a couple of goals, but one of the goals is that we have the documentation to comply with any outside audit, whether it's our own external auditors, whether it's our internal auditors, whether it's the Treasury Department coming back to us at some point in the future. So we have the documentation as to how the money was spent, what it was spent for, that the distribution was within our guidelines to an appropriate recipient. So to the extent that you're going to rely on somebody else to distribute money and then report information back to us, that puts the county in a weaker position in the event we're going through an audit, and we will go through an audit with our outside auditors at some point. So I like the grant model, the reimbursement model, not the grant model, the reimbursement model directly to a recipient, and then you create kind of multiple buckets, so to speak.
All right. I think to Mr. Fraz's comment, we had originally, with the assistance of the task force, when they were allocating the 45-55 as a concept, that resulted in, and don't quote me on the numbers, but somewhere in the area of $78 per resident. But that included the municipalities taking care of the fire district component out of theirs. So if we're to say that the fire districts are separate, then what we would be doing essentially, and I'm just going to, a percentage of that would go to fire districts. So when we see the numbers come in, we have to realize that the cities themselves, if their fire districts are going to be taken care of or their fire departments are going to be taken care of separately, then that would reduce the per head number that would be allocated for their other requests. I would assume if we're going to have those districts apply separately for those municipalities that have their own in-city fire department and don't provide service outside the city, would they submit two applications then, or would it be just included in their municipal application?
I think it would have to be included in their municipal application, but carved out and identified as
fire.
Aspect is
All right.
fire.
So we wouldn't put an additional burden on those that have, those municipalities that have what I'll call an in-house fire department. But what we would do is receive applications from those fire districts that cover multiple municipalities and or those that cover unincorporated areas.
Right.
All right. Mr. Kenyon.
Passing it out directly to the fire districts makes so much more sense. The less hands it goes through, the quicker it gets where it gets used.
Right.
And we have, not that we don't trust anybody, but it just makes it flow faster.
Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my opinion is that all money that goes out from this fund should be vetted and checked by us. Like if I had my way, that's how we would do it. And so that applies to this as well. I think from the 45%, there should be something set aside for all taxing bodies that we're going to consider eligible, not just the fire districts, and as well as the idea of a small business, nonprofit grants, anything like that, I personally think should go through us as well. And that would mean a chunk, maybe $10 million goes to all that stuff, and then the rest goes to the municipality. So that would still be about $30 million. Right. And the per capita would still be, I think, even above the average.
And again, on this issue with the fire districts, we just want to get it right. There's two different ways, probably even more than two different ways, but two that we've discussed. So if the consensus of the committee is to move forward with the process of the districts applying directly, we'll set that up and take that into account as we're drafting our final application. All right, any other comments or questions? Hearing none, thank you. All right, let's move ahead to the census consensus. We were working with the last presentation we had was the CMAP numbers. There were a few municipalities that had some requests that their numbers be modified due to additional information. I've seen documentation that was submitted to the state's attorney's office from a couple of the municipalities, and I understand that, Joe, you're still working with them to finalize those numbers?
We are. So I've heard from a handful of the. It is, yes. So I've heard from a handful of the municipalities about modifications that they would like you to make to their census counts. Again, I had a conference, video conference with the Metro West Council of Mayors and Ms. Melendi last week. I think there is, most of them agree with the numbers, but there are a couple of municipalities that think their numbers should be a little bit higher. I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think the city of Aurora thinks their number should be considerably higher. But we're still working through that. Ultimately, I'll make a recommendation to this board as to what number you use and you rely on. It's going to have to be a government sourced data set. The concept of accepting from individual municipalities their best estimate based on building permits or occupancy permits, in my opinion, that allows for too much kind of variance within municipalities without the ability to verify actual population. So we're still working on it. I'll have a recommendation to you, I hope a week from today, but I'm still working on it.
All right, any comments on that issue? Hearing none. All right, the next two items go together. The item I is Kane County share, the unincorporated areas. That will go through the development committee and be an item on their agenda for work as we go through this process. They're in the process of gathering information for their, what I'll consider an application in terms of reimbursement. And Mr. Martin, do you have any comments on that at this point? All right, so we'll hear back from them. We have the system set up for that. That'll include, I would expect it'll include the sheriff's deputy patrol component, because that's primarily the unincorporated areas, and whatever other expenses you'll be from that share, of course, will deal with the fire districts that are in the unincorporated areas as well. All right. Another significant item that we need to move forward with is discussion of the balance of the funds. And that, when I call the balance of the funds, that's the 55% that we've reserved for county-wide expenses. And we have seen presentations that were made as facilitated by the chairman as it related to certain uses in capital projects that the county could apply funds to. But in the meantime, we've also received information from Mr. Onzik regarding other expenses that would be available or potential for reimbursement. Last night, I received, or yesterday afternoon, from the clerk's office, Brian Pollock sent to me an itemized list of their expenses. He made a presentation. I think it's important as we push through the application process for the outside entities that we're going to share funds with, that we get the county process going. So what I'd like to do with the consent of this committee and the full board is set up a meeting at which we can dedicate our discussion. First of all, we can solicit applications from anyone in the county that feels that they have an appropriate expense, maybe that would be subject to being paid for or reimbursed out of this. Maybe we have those now, but some of this requires a little bit of fine tuning, but in the very near future, within the next week or so, I'd like to have a meeting where we all discuss our priorities with the funds for the county so that we can give direction to the county staff in terms of projects. To the extent they're capital projects, there's requirements that the funds be expended. That's going to be a longer turnaround time than it will be, for example, for payroll reimbursement, which we incur as time goes on. So the sooner we get those done, the better. I know, just as an example, the sheriff's request for communications equipment, that would have, if we were inclined to approve that request, it would have to be ordered and processed, and I'm sure there's some turnaround time for that. So I would ask any county staff that's here today or Mr. Chairman, if we wanted to have put together a list of county requests, what would be a reasonable time frame to get all those pooled into an accurate document that would be thorough? I know that for example, we're saying to the municipalities, once we get our application, you got 14 days to give us response. Is it that amount of time still necessary for the county, or would we be able to get that together sooner?
It looks like your target is for many of the things that are on today's agenda is for next week's meeting. I thought that there was going to be discussion today in moving along the proposals that are on the agenda for today's meeting. I thought those were going to be moved today. But if you want the whole, everything else seems to be for next Monday's meeting, I think that a week makes sense.
I think the key thing, I know this committee and the members and even the full board's committed to spend as many meetings as we need to get this done. It would be great if we were prepared by the next county board meeting to have resolutions that would implement the county allocations, if we could do that, I think. And so whether that requires 2 meetings in a week or whatever to get that done, I think the key thing is to get the resolutions for the county side set up. And I think it would be a reasonable goal that if we, at our August meeting, had a significant amount of those funds, a percentage of those funds allocated or spoken for, that would be a reasonable outcome. Is
Good. Good. And we have maybe 4 or 5 of those resolutions already in draft form.
Right. But we have those resolutions. Those were capital expenditures, but we also have what I'll call operating expense reimbursements that we need to put together.
And I look at that as basically what Joe Onsick has provided to the committee last week and probably again this week, and to the federal government on the 17th.
Okay. Is there anything more that we would expect, or do we have all the material?
Between now and your next meeting on next Monday, we can take a look so that we have an all-encompassing.
All right. And would this committee then want to, we're doing some clerical work here today and then what I'll call substantive work into dealing with allocations, because to the extent that the county requests exceed the available funds, we're going to have to prioritize and make recommendations. So once we have the entire packet, do we need that? I assume that discussion will be, get input from everyone and will take a while. Mr. Surgis.
John, just 2 comments. So I understand this clearly. The funds need to be expended by December. Let me just give an example. If Ron wanted radios and we get them ordered and yay, this is the full intent of what we wanted, but they're back ordered, does that prohibit us from doing that under this process?
I don't know.
Or all that matters is you ordered them and it's no big deal when they get there.
I don't know the final answer to that, but I do know from talking to Scott Berger, it is clearly better if the funds have been out the door. Mr. Chairman.
That is a whopper of an assumption that's actually incorrect. There is an example of an OIG, Office of Inspector General audit that was done where the folks didn't spend the money 3 days late. and they had to send back millions of dollars on a different type of grant, not one of these grants. So the answer to your question is, it must be spent under current legislation, which they're negotiating on that in Washington DC today, while we're meeting here, they're talking about things that will adjust what you're doing here today. That's why I think that it's a little bit more complex than some people give it credit for. But it must be spent, and it has to be fulfilled. If you think the radio one is challenging, you might want to talk with Mr. Fonstock as far as what it's like to get the fiber optics into the underserved areas, so that there's the telemedicine, the work from home for less exposure, and the distance learning. So that's one that's really pushing the. So the answer is December 30th or send it back.
Okay, so I guess, answer my question. Two, needs to be spent.
Yeah.
Meaning
Spent.
money's out the door.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if the radios came in or not. We've already allocated, it's there.
No.
How
you
does
have
that, help me define
substantial-
that.
It's just like a tax return, substantial, like not substantial compliance, but substantial completion of the project and paid for. And if you.
We can, as we go through the
No, it's gotta be
process,
done.
we can evaluate that as well. But at our next meeting, are we prepared then to go through the county? If we can have all the information before that meeting, that'd be helpful.
And then, John, I did have a second comment that
Yes.
I am not interested in leapfrogging the county's expenditure over getting the 45% out. Those need to run concurrently. I would have a real problem knowing that we've allocated ours and we're spending ours while they're still jumping through hoops. We need to be doing those simultaneously.
Well, that's our goal, to do them simultaneously, and hopefully we can get to that, but they'll be as close to simultaneous as possible. All right. Any other comments from the committee members? Mr. Frost?
Yeah, I would just like to, you'd mentioned presentations, but then in the discussion with Chairman Lawson, it sounded like these would be in writing, hopefully.
Right.
If we could get them by end of business Friday, that'd be even better. But I'm really not interested in another round of presentations that will take up the whole meeting.
I think we have resolutions for many of them for some of these big pieces.
So if we could have time to look at them over the weekend, that would be great.
Be fine, okay. So
and
we'll request input from the staff.
On a second note,
Yep.
as far as what Cliff was talking about, we do have to be careful as far as our allotment to the municipalities, that money does have to be spent by December 1st. So anything returned to us is going to have to be spent also. So we'll have to have time to reallocate that and give somebody time to spend it. So, we should think in terms of like an October 1st or October 15th deadline
For their
from the
expenditures,
municipalities
right.
to expend them.
All right. As far as another meeting, then, what is?
Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Thomas.
So in preparation for our next meeting, I would ask that Director Onzig provide more clarification on these numbers. I'm looking at this chart, estimated expenses eligible for reimbursement from Coronavirus Relief Fund, and this is the second update we've received, but this chart is not clear to me. The Sheriff's Office is mentioned specifically, the Health Department is mentioned specifically, but then there's this line that talks about paid hours worked, other COVID specific. Is that IT and administration and all other departments combined? And then these lines that talk about services and commodities, again, is that everything but the Health Department and Sheriff's Office?
And just to include on your, or follow up on your comment, we have, as the chairman has mentioned a couple times, we already have resolutions drafted for some of the county expenses. Are those included in this list, or are they separate? We just need to know that.
And again, if and I've asked for this, if we could have like a one-page summary basically of the numbers. So every department that we've already heard, that we've already received presentations from, listed. What have you spent? One column. What's your total? Second column. If we could have that, that would be very helpful.
Mr. Kenyon?
Once we give the money, is there a method for reporting back what's spent? Because we don't want a surprise on municipalities saying, well, we've got $5 million left. Why didn't you tell us?
You're talking about the city?
Yeah, the cities or the fire departments too,
Right.
anybody.
We'll have status reports being provided to us periodically, but in terms of the intergovernmental agreement, we'll need to put an end deadline in there early enough so we don't have a last round to deal with. Mr. McMahon?
So the program model right now, and it's still a work in process, but the concept is that the municipalities would submit an expense report for reimbursement to the county. So we wouldn't give them money and then they spend it. They would spend it first. They would provide all the cost reports, the documentation, everything that we're going to need to review to make sure that their expenses are consistent with the intergovernmental agreement, with the intent of the funds. They provide the documentation to us before we reimburse the municipality for the expense. So it's not like they'll have money sitting there that they have to send back to us. There is, your concept of a deadline is critical, because if we get to early October, I think as Mr. Fraz suggested, and some of the municipalities have not submitted reimbursement requests, or some portion of their allocation is unspent, then you need time to reallocate that either internally or to other external projects. That's a policy decision, but you have to have time to have that money back out the door, spent, implemented, all in time for the deadline. And as it stands right now, that's December 31.
Right. One of the other questions that we need to consider is when we, and this will involve like input from the state's attorney and perhaps the auditor, as we, as county department heads and elected officials make requests for what we think are COVID appropriate expenses, whether they do in fact qualify for the program. And so I think that's something that we're going to need input on as well as we go forward. We can look at that, but to the extent that the state's attorney's office can be looking at the requests as well, if there's any red flags there, we would need to have them put up. Ms. Thomas?
But wouldn't our requests, perhaps one that comes to mind in particular, be going through the consultant?
Both the consultant, Scott Berger's office will have a role in this. My office will have a role in this as well. So there'll be a couple of layers of kind of approval, review and approval, or disapproval.
All right. All right, so we're prepared for that. So let's talk about meeting schedule for next week. Does Monday work for the committee?
Yes.
No.
So Board of Review, how about the afternoon of next Monday? Would that be, because we have Board of Review in this meeting? In this, they moved for us this morning. Mr. Hanson?
Could we do it on the front end of COW? Or we already have the commitment to be here that afternoon anyways.
Committee of the Whole's at 4 o'clock.
Right.
That's on Tuesday.
Correct.
Is there a Forest Preserve Finance meeting before that? That typically happens, no?
That's tomorrow.
All right. Is Tuesday convenient for the committee? If we're going to be here at 4? Is there a preference?
I'd prefer Monday
I don't have a
or
preference.
this Friday.
Pardon? Or this Friday?
Can we meet Friday?
How about, what about, does anyone object to Monday afternoon? Mr. Hanson?
I may or may not be able to attend, but we've all committed to Tuesday as a working day for COW anyways. That was my recommendation there.
All right, Mr. Sanchez.
I don't have a preferred day, just something to think about. Wednesdays, we are here, staff's already here, there's meetings going on every Wednesday. I don't know if that works for everybody else, just another idea to throw out there. If that'll
Well, we want to get at this as soon as we can, yeah, because we may have more work to do and have to schedule another meeting. So I'd say it'd either be Monday or Tuesday. Is there a show of hands from the committee as who prefers Monday?
Guess it doesn't make a difference to me.
Okay. All right, Monday afternoon, a time, 3 o'clock to 2 o'clock, what's the preferred time?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock? All right, we will schedule next Monday, 3 o'clock. If there's any concerns with that, let me know. We can adjust if we have to, but the plan will be Monday, July 27th at 3 p.m. All right, under the new business portion of the agenda, the first item deals with what the state's attorney presented this morning, and that's a resolution directing the Office of Community Reinvestment to assist in the process. Is there a motion to approve this? Mr. Kenyon, second by Mr. Sanchez. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Braz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Burgess. Okay, O'Shea.
Okay, item B. Let's just see here. C, D, E, and F. I believe all could be tabled to our next meeting because those will be discussion items for then. So I'll entertain a motion to do that. Mr. Fraz, Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion. Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll. B through F.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Braz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Burgess. Okay, passes.
All right, is there any other business for the committee this morning, Mr. Fraz?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that at some point we set aside time to talk about the small business aspect of the whole thing and whether, how that will be set up, whether it will be a portion of the, for example, if we give the municipalities 45%, do we require that a small percentage of that be set aside for small businesses? We all get this magazine or this newspaper of the National Association of Counties. They talk about how counties are allotting their funds, and 4 out of the 5 talk almost exclusively about small business relief. So I think it's an important element of what we're doing, and we're going to have to define where that's coming from throughout this process.
Right. Mr. Surgis?
Thank you, Chairman. Being a small business owner, I see things from a little bit different perspective sometimes. And I know that at least in the environments that I work within now, some of these grants, loans, monies that came out early on are already being called, payments are already scheduled to begin in August. And I know that when this stuff was set up back in March, April, there was an urgency to get it out, and everybody thought this would be dead and over and extinguished, and let's move on to life as normal, but it's not. So for these businesses that are already looking ahead to next month, they're not only saying, you got to be kidding me, we're not out of the woods yet. We barely hung on, and some of the monies we received up front are already expected back. We don't have a way to honor that, to do it. And so I don't want anybody that's sitting here to think that this is time to be comfortable. This is time to be expeditious. This is time to keep your foot on the gas pedal. These payments that are coming due in August, they're just debited right out of the business owner's account. There's no negotiation. There's no, hey, there was a second flare up. You guys mind pushing it back 3 months? That's not the reality. I am anticipating businesses beginning to close again in August. So if there's a grant proposal, brothers and sisters, it's now. It's go time. Figure it out. There is an urgency, and it's August, just for what it's worth.
Mr. Kenyon?
We're also going to have to consider the not-for-profits like PADS, Hesed House. I talked to the senior service people in Hampshire, and they provide rides to the doctors for people that don't have a car. It's like a cab to the doctor, and their funds are very limited. And it's a great cause, taking care of your seniors, you know what I mean?
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
All right, just a minute. Mr. Sanchez next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious to know, and not that you have the answer, what do we need, what information do we need altogether to really have that conversation and make that determination? Because I agree that time is of the essence. If we could figure that out next week at next week's meeting, I would be preferable to that. So I'm just curious what information we would really need. We don't have all the all the requests from the fire districts. And, you know, if we're going to do other small taxing bodies, we don't know what their numbers are going to be. So how do we figure out if we're going to have a set aside for them?
Well, I would say certainly, given the schedule we set up today, we'll know the largest sum is being reserved by the county, 55%. And we'll know as we allocate that. I mean, there's really two shares where these funds can come from. Either, you know, if we're going to do business grants or we're going to do not-for-profit allocations, we could take it from the county side, or we could take it from the city side, or we could take it off the top if we chose to do that. I think once we see by Friday what the county's requests are, then you can decide whether those, in your mind, as a board member, have priority over setting aside funds to the extent that they request all the money we have. If there's leftover funds, we could certainly consider that for allocation, or if there's a county request that you don't deem to be a priority over the small business sector, then you can make that suggestion at that time. I think that's a fair way to at least consider it. So I don't know the answer right now because I want to make sure we've got all the requests in, okay?
Thank you.
Mr. Hanson?
Thank you. Yeah, to Cliff's point, we need to step on the gas, and that doesn't mean every single component of our allocation has to be expedited, but there's a need there. The federal money that came out was designed for 2.5 months protection. Those 2.5 months have come and gone, and many other counties in this state and others have designed a small business grant program. I don't think we want to be in the loan business. And I personally believe in the conversations that we've had offline and online that any small business aid that we provide should come out of the county share. I've said it before that a coffee shop in Algonquin is just as beneficial to the county as a coffee shop that's viable and vibrant in Aurora too. So I'm happy to say on record that the small business aid that we provide, if we design a program for that, should be done quickly and should come from the county share.
I know we directed the state's attorney's office to evaluate the structure of our program based on other counties' situations. I also, this concept of subrecipients versus direct recipients would dictate that if there was a program, it would be better suited if it was county administered because the direct recipients would be coming from the county. But again, as we get more information, more numbers in, let's look at this and we can talk about that next meeting. All right. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Did I misunderstand that one of the purposes of making the 45% allocation to all local governments, both incorporated and unincorporated, was so that with their greater knowledge of local needs, that all these missions are very important, but local missions were going to be decided by those local governments? Wasn't that the 45%? And then whether each time Mr. Frost mentions small business, somebody on this side of the room mentions nonprofits, usually someone mentions food pantries in the progression of the conversation. But wasn't the clear understanding of why it was the full 45% to local governments was that then they would then know better than we would know what the needs are in their local communities? Did I misunderstand that 45% goes to local governments then go from there? The accounting of it can be aggregated respecting what's come to the table today as far as we want direct recipients for greater information and greater audit control. I understand those, but is it aggregated now out of the counties to do all those things? Or wasn't the clear understanding that it came out of the 45%?
Yeah, I mean, as one individual, I don't think that was etched in stone either way. We allocated pools of money. I suppose in an ideal world, if we had enough time, we'd see the county's requests and the municipal requests to see if they included grant programs for their businesses, but we're going to have to evaluate that as time goes on. I don't have an answer for that today. Ms. Barrero?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to reiterate what several of the commissioners have already said regarding small businesses and not-for-profits and the homeless shelters also. I understand what Chairman Lawson is referring to, but I believe that these are other areas that we do need to consider. So if the committee would choose to look at some of those areas to see where we can help out in those also, I think you need to make that decision soon if you're going to make the all those entities or all those individuals, organizations or businesses come out of those cities or not before they start, before we start distributing some of this money. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments of the committee? Mr. Surgis?
I think as we go on, I think we're all fully prepared with the notion that there's going to be more asks than potential monies available. And it is going to be our responsibility to prioritize that. In respect to grant funds for small businesses, whether that's 55, 45, I don't want to step out of line and step on the Council of Mayors' toes in any way, shape, or form, but I would be more than happy to reach out to my towns where I would expect, Gilbert, Sleepy, West, and East Dundee, with the largest town being just over 8,000 residents, have very different needs and may find it a challenge to spend all of their money if we didn't make available grants that they would happily administer and know who best to get them to. As compared to maybe the larger towns, Carpentersville, Elgin, Aurora, that probably have significantly different needs than say Gilbert's or Sleepy Hollow. So I'm more than happy to have those conversations and could complete that as fast as Friday if need be. So.
All right. Any other comments? Obviously, we have a lot of work to complete. Ms. Thomas?
To the point that's already been made about expediting this process, I just want to be clear about certain deadlines that I think we've agreed on. So by next Monday, we expect to see an updated IGA, FAQ, and application, and then we will vote to approve those documents. Is that correct?
That's the intention.
Okay, and so then we will also be prepared to set the deadline to receive applications, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then one final thing just for us to think about, last week we were prepared or considering $1 million for PPE. I would be perfectly fine today saying, we already kind of had $1 million set aside for something, but we voted it down. Why don't we, to start, set that $1 million aside for grants, whether that's grants to nonprofits and or small businesses? Is that something we could agree to and get done next week? And that's something for us to think about, just as we go from here today.
So we'll have that will come from our discussion next week. Just thinking through this, I think the idea of a Monday meeting is appropriate because we may have to spend longer than I anticipate, depending on how the discussion goes. So having to be finished by the time another meeting starts could be a challenge. So
Stay agile, my friend.
Yes.
Stay agile.
All right. Any further discussion for this meeting? Hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Fraz, Mr. Kenyon. All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you.